There is hope. If you are struggling and under a toxic boss, I have a whole chapter on life beyond a toxic boss, thriving in your career, your career. You're the CEO of your own career. And I have stories of hope and survivors who are doing so much better now and really saying, I wish I'd quit sooner. And I want to pass that on to you that here's what happened after I left. It was like the windows open and the negative energy left. And it just really is inspiring. And I want to leave people with that hope and inspiration, not all negative and doom and gloom.
Welcome to Ira's Everything Bagel, where I talk with intriguing people about everything, their passions, pursuits, and points of view. Please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and I appreciate it. Today on Ira's Everything Bagel, we're talking about a problem far too many people know all too well, the toxic boss. My guest is Dr. Laura Hambley Lovett, PhD. She's an organizational psychologist with 25 years of experience and the author of the new book, I Wish I Had Quit Sooner, Practical Strategies for Navigating and Escaping a Toxic Boss. From the boardroom to the Zoom room, toxic leadership is driving frustration, burnout, and broken careers. And Dr. Laura helps recognize it, survive it, and escape it. She breaks down common toxic boss personas. She explains how unhealthy leadership affects our mental health and careers and offers practical evidence-based tools to take back control of your professional life. If you've ever dreaded going to work or questioned your confidence or wondered whether it's time to walk away, this conversation is for you. I wish I had quit sooner. Practical Strategies for Navigating and Escaping a Toxic Boss is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Bookshop.org, and all the usual places. And for everything about Dr. Laura, go to drlaura.live, drlaura.live, and follow her on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, X, and YouTube. And Dr. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm assuming that you wrote this book not just from an academic perspective or an interest in it, but something must have happened in your previous life that caused you to think about it and want to write about it.
Yes, you're right. I was personally impacted by toxic leadership earlier in my career. And then I went on to have a 25-year career in organizational psychology. And over the last few years, I had noticed a lot of our clients, and we have clients across Canada that we help with their careers, their leadership, and we've noticed way more instances of toxic workplaces. So over the last couple of years, I started to research the topic across North America as an adjunct professor. I'm able to conduct research, and I really dug into interviewing and surveying toxic boss survivors to get to the root at what was going on.
Well, what you're based in Canada, right? So that's why you mentioned North America because it covers everything. I was under the impression that given all the new laws that have been passed in the last 25 to 30 years in terms of discrimination, in terms of worker rights, et cetera, at least in the United States, can't speak to Canada, that there would be less toxic bosses than more toxic bosses, but you're still finding that happening.
Absolutely. So, of course, we have more laws and policies and things, but it's a lot of the behaviors that go underground. So we have more covert types of behaviors for sure. So the overt behaviors are more the obvious ones, like the bullying and the harassment, and people are still doing that. There's no doubt about that. But there's the covert behaviors too that are more subtle and manipulative and sneaky, like a snake in the grass, and they're tougher to detect. They often spread in silence.
So is there something that causes that behavior when you get to a level of being a boss, even if it's a mid-level boss? Is there something in everyone's nature that when they get a little power in an organization that it just comes out, or are they that way to begin with?
That is a very, very good question. So, from what I've seen so far in my 25 years and through the research, is there, first of all, I really need to distinguish the difference between a toxic boss and a difficult boss because it gets mixed up a lot. And the
Sure.
word toxic is quite dramatic. So, I want to really caution people to use that word carefully because it's reserved for the truly toxic. And the truly toxic bosses, they're not true leaders because a true leader brings out the best in their people. A toxic boss degrades and depletes them, and they have a series of behaviors that get worse over time, and it essentially damages their work engagement, their well-being, and their productivity. Toxic bosses do not improve, and they do not have the self-insight to be able to do so. A difficult boss, on the other hand, they're promoted into leadership positions, often with inadequate training, often because they're good at their job, and they can learn to become better if they have the right supports and they're open to becoming better. They're just stumbling their way through it. They may be frustrating, poor communicators, they may micromanage, etc., but they're not intentionally causing harm, and it's not getting worse over time.
I'm making an assumption too that you wrote the book. Again, it's called I Wish I'd Quit Sooner, Practical Strategies for Navigating and Escaping a Toxic Boss, which is a tongueful of title and subtitle, but it works because it explains what it is. I assume that the reason you wrote the book, another reason you wrote the book is because some people would look to higher ups, higher than their bosses for help, and they may not get it from senior management, let's say, if they're dealing with a middle manager and they're having issues with a toxic boss, they think they can go to HR, or they can go to a higher level executive and get some help, but that may not be the case. So your book is addressing what you can do to cope with it in the real work world.
Exactly. And I know the title's a lot, but I call it I Wish I'd Quit Sooner because that's what a lot of the research participants told us during the research. Now that I know what's on the other side of it and how much I suffered under it, I wish I'd quit sooner. But people often feel stuck. And that's why there's a cage on the front of my book. You feel trapped. You feel you have two options. Either I quit and I can't because I'm financially dependent on this job. And I may have been in this company for years and I can't just quit and the economy's tough. Or I stay and I endure it and I suffer and it gets worse over time. But there's actually four other options. One of them is reporting to HR. And I dive into that, all the pros, the cons, the risks, what you need to know before you do that so that you go in with eyes wide open if that's the path you take.
Is it different in a medium or small size company versus a larger company in terms of the techniques and tactics that you recommend and talk about in the book? Is it different for a much, much more giant corporation than it would be for a middle level company or, a mom and pop operation, which still could be a couple hundred people?
Yes and no. So the bigger ones have bigger HR teams, more policies, theoretically more protections. However,
Mhm.
politics can get worse the bigger the company because there's more layers and there's more political maneuvering. So it's kind of apples and oranges in terms of how it all works, but I see toxicity in the small ones, in the small businesses, all the way to the global enterprises. And I see it in public and private and even healthcare. Higher education is a hot spot for it. Nonprofits are a hot spot. It would shock you because we did research, Wall Street, Hollywood, those types of places, law firms, government. You'd kind of expect it, but you wouldn't expect it in some of those other organizations I mentioned. So it happens in any type of organization. And my book applies to all of them.
Does it happen again to my original question way back when we started, which seems like just a few minutes ago, which it is, but is it part of human nature when someone gets into a position of authority or power, whether it's in a small company or a big company, that they become this toxic boss, or is it inherent in human nature and there's just a certain group of people that no matter what will become a toxic boss?
It's thank goodness it's not just because you're in a position of power, because a position of power is a position of great responsibility. And it all depends on your values and how you were brought up and what your childhood was like, etc., in terms of how you go about in the world, how you treat other human beings, what your ethics and morals are around that. And but I would add that what I see with toxic bosses is they've likely had deep-rooted childhood traumas that were never healed, and they go into their work and into their career and they climb the ladder. They're charismatic, they're smart, they're able to impress people, and they're very good at managing up. so they get promoted. We see a lot of narcissism in toxic bosses, and that's one of the 8 personas in my book. And narcissists are very charming and very good at getting, and we see them getting to top level positions. But it's that unhealed trauma, and that's why I say we can't just get them a leadership coach or put them in a course. I mean, I've taught a lot of those over my career. I've helped a lot of difficult leaders. A toxic boss, that's not going to help. It runs much deeper, and they should not be leading human beings. They can be working, but they should not be in a people leadership role.
Yeah, a narcissist can be a very hard to change in terms of
Mhm.
a personality type. When you look at it too, and this again, I want to go back to something I asked you about earlier in a different way, but it's always surprising that you could have a toxic boss that is tolerated by upper management. Meanwhile, talented people below that toxic boss are leaving, and I'm sure they must have exit interviews or they will write some sort of report as to
Mhm.
why they're leaving. Wouldn't that be an early warning bell to senior management that they need to take a look at this person, this toxic boss?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I always say those exit interviews need to be treated like gold, right? This is key information, but oftentimes it's just a checklist for HR. Did you do the exit interview? Yes. Right? And then
And then
the
it's
tox
filed, and then it's filed, and you don't see it again.
You're right, Ira.
Yeah.
And then if it gets brought up to the higher up of that boss, hey, this is a concern about this boss, then they're often defending themselves and saying, oh, yeah, that person, Ira, they said all this stuff, but let me tell you, Ira was lazy. Ira didn't do his job. And then they're really good at blaming it all on the other person. And because they're very smart and charismatic and manipulative, then the higher up says, okay, so that loss wasn't really a loss. No, that wasn't really a loss. And then it has to be a whole bunch of them before they finally have the alarm bells. And oftentimes that's, a year or 2 or 3 years of, abusing people before it actually gets taken more seriously.
Because of the structural changes or challenges in a corporation or a business, that that canary in the coal mine is not going to work. As you just said, it takes several people leaving before it finally starts registering up above. But for the person that's under a toxic boss, is there an early warning system? Is there a canary in the coal mine that they can spot and realize, before I spend too much time in this company, I'm under the thumb of a toxic boss and I've got to do something about it?
Exactly. I mean, oftentimes it'll start out subtle and it'll start out, oh, I had a really bad day. The boss said something that really hurt me or offended me. It'll just start out as one thing, but then it's
Mhm.
the sequence of things, which is why I say document it. Get an old-fashioned journal or get your own computer, not your work computer, by the way, because if you get let go, you lose that device. I want you to put it on your own device and just chart it. When did the incident happen? How did it make you feel? And was anyone else there? And you'll see it gradually gets worse over time.
If you have to leave and you make the decision to leave and you come up with an exit strategy, and obviously you meeting with HR as part of that. Is there a couple of tips you can give us and the readers to whet their appetite for the book about what you can do? And I'm sure you're going to strike a chord with a lot of people about this topic because I think almost everyone at some point in their work life has worked for a toxic boss. And it could be just at a very minimal level or it could be at a major long-term situation, but people do it. But are there some strategies that you could recommend or tactics that you could recommend to deal with that, especially if you decide you're leaving?
Yes, and I wrote the book because I really had a choice. Do I write a book for individuals, for people like you, like your listeners, people who are going through this, or do I write a book for HR and leaders to actually do something about it in organizations? Turns out that's another book in the future. This book
We'll have you
and
back
other
on.
and this book is for the person because I've seen firsthand their confidence gets destroyed. I've worked with even people in senior leadership roles, smart, educated, experienced. They fall prey to a toxic CEO, for example, and they are just shattered. Their confidence is shattered. So you asked about what to do about it. Well, the first step is what is happening here, what is going on. So understanding the behaviors and naming the behaviors that you're dealing with, the patterns that you're dealing with is the first step. Understanding how it's affecting you. So I have checklists in the books and things in the book to really get at how's it affecting my mental health, my physical health, my ability to focus on my work, my ability to solve problems, my sleep, my eating, my sleeping, like all of those things. And then what to do about it. And I always coach people on creating a winning exit plan. Creating a winning exit plan is looking at when is my good riddance date? When am I going to no longer put up with this? And then we'll work backwards and put the things into place to start setting yourself up to look for other roles internally. And that's, you mentioned bigger organizations earlier. Bigger ones, at least there's a chance you can move laterally and internally. Smaller ones, no chance.
Yeah, the
So,
bigger
and
one, you
then,
can move to a different department, especially if you have
yeah.
connections with other departments, etc.
And I've seen that happen if it's big enough. But if not, it's you're going to be dusting off your resume. You're going to be leveraging your network and getting yourself out there, even if it's a crappy economy. And I know that's hard. I really know how hard that is. And when a toxic boss depletes you, you start to have no energy for that. That's the last thing you have energy for. So that's why I always want people to set a good riddance date 3 to 6 months out, maybe 9 months out to say, this is it. This is when I'm no longer putting up with it. So I need the motivation to start looking.
No, that makes perfect sense. I want to get back to HR for a second too. Does it make sense? A lot of companies are set up in a way that you do interact or become friends with people that work in HR, not necessarily the director or vice president of HR, but someone that works there. Would that help in a case where you've got a toxic boss on a lower level where you are, and you can at least communicate informally with a work associate or friend that works in HR, or is that just not going to be the right way to approach it?
Well, what you nailed it. If it's a friend, so if it's someone that you trust, so if it's someone that you trust,
Right.
absolutely. I say connecting with other human beings and colleagues who you can trust, maybe colleagues who have gone through it, are going through it, or even people who have left at that toxic boss and are on the other side of it, connecting with them, connecting with HR. If you have a trusting relationship, absolutely. Really, really important.
But would that friend that's say in HR that works on a staff level, would they take your concerns and discuss it with their boss to let them know that this is going on, or is that a double-edged sword?
Well, that's why in the book I really get at, well, what's the dynamic at play, and
Hmm.
are you going to have your confidentiality assured? And if you want the complaint to be formal, yes, it'll get back to your boss. But if you just are finding out information confidentially, what are the assurances that it will be confidential? And some of my clients and research participants, they've taken medical leaves, and that's a whole other topic in the book is pros and cons of taking a medical leave. Sometimes the body just decides and you have no choice. You are on the medical leave because your body has just broken down from the toxic behavior.
Hmm. Yeah, it's not just physical, it's mental, emotional. I mean, it's not just
Yes.
mental and emotional, it's physical too. Your body does react
Hmm.
to the stress that's caused on a day. You're working on a daily basis and you're subjected to this nonsense. You talk about the different toxic boss personas. There's 8 different ones. Can you give us an example of one or two that people might recognize? Because I think everybody thinks of a toxic boss maybe in a generalized sense, and they're
Hmm.
not recognizing that there's more to it than that. There's more subtlety in some cases than others.
Well, there's the dishonest manipulator. So they're always telling lies and falsehoods and making up their own narrative. It's always about them getting ahead, and
Mhm.
they will not hesitate to throw you under the bus and to take credit for your work. So that's a tricky one. Another one is the control freak. And I differentiate that from the micromanager. So we see a lot of people who are promoted into management. They micromanage at first just because they're not used to delegating, right? And they're
Right.
thinking, I would do it better. So, and I'm accountable for this. So I've got to be like in there reviewing everything. It's a normal rookie mistake in management. But a control freak, a toxic boss control freak, is on everything. They're just watching everything. There's zero trust, and they are hovering, maybe electronically hovering. They're going into your calendar and analyzing things. I actually had a story about this saying, "Hey, I noticed you had a couple of blank spots in your calendar. What were those?" And that really where you feel like you are walking on eggshells. You are not trusted. That's a control freak.
Yeah, that's a hard one to deal with. Well, what keeps people from making that decision? And I'll include you in this conversation. What takes someone a long time, a longer time than necessary to make that decision to leave? In other words, what keeps you and others from leaving when you first sense that something is wrong?
Oh, well, fear, right? Fear that, well, this is bad, but at least I'm established here and I like the work. So
Mhm.
oftentimes you like the actual work, and that's what keeps you there. And then it becomes tricky again to have the energy to actually to leave because your energy is just sapped.
When you use your own experience and you incorporate it into your book, do you find that it's hard to keep it on a professional level? Does it get emotional for you if you're when you're writing about the subject and you've experienced some of it yourself? Do you have a hard time separating the wheat from the chaff, so to speak?
Well, I mean, as a practicing psychologist, I'm able to separate it a bit, and I think it's because I tell a couple of my own stories in the book,
Mhm.
and but I've healed from those. I got the appropriate therapy. I got the treatment. I got through those tough times earlier in my career. Had I not, yeah, they would really, really trigger me. I call it triggering. But in this case, I was able to just know that by sharing my story and just opening up, right? I'm professional, I'm a business leader, this and that, but I've had my own struggles and I've hit really difficult spots in my career and suffered from postpartum depression, which really knocked me off my feet. And I want people who are suffering from depression and anxiety to know that there's a path forward. There's great things that can help you. There's great treatments and therapies and there's hope. You should not have to suffer. Life is tough enough. Life is beautiful but tricky, but you shouldn't have to suffer in this dark, lonely place.
Especially when you think about it, I mean, it's a work environment. It's not as if you're at war. It's not as if you're starving to death. You're in a
Mhm.
work environment. And you're right. You shouldn't have to suffer for it.
Mhm.
Life is tricky. You could be perfect health and then trip on something and break your nose or whatever it is. I mean, these things happen. So what do you find that when you finish the book, and obviously you shared it with people to look at, colleagues, etc., did they give you feedback on anything that you ch ended up changing, or did they all say no, let's leave it the way it is, or did they find something that you may not have realized that you wrote or didn't write, and they said, hey, you should include this or take this out?
Well, I had a fabulous editor, and after every when we were first conceptualizing the book, it was how much of a do you want it to be stories and really engaging versus two academic research citations and things. And
Right.
I mean, I wanted to back up the research and look at other research and stuff as an organizational psychologist and adjunct professor would, but I really came to the point that I want it to be really digestible and stories and checklists and practical. And that's what we made it really a toolkit really. And there's these Dr. Laura's coaching breaks. It's if you were being coached by me, what would I give you as homework? What would I give you as activities and journal prompts and things to think about deeply? That's all in there. And the book's on Audible, where I have a 50-page workbook included with Audible so that people can go from start to finish. And that might feel like a lot, 50 pages, but you can kind of meet it where it's at. If you've already left and you're in the healing and recovery, then you just focus on that section. You don't have to read the earlier chapters.
I think too that if you had just kept it academic, you wouldn't be reaching as wide an audience or helping as many people.
No, and I'm really practical. That's why I'm not a full-time professor. I just thought it was too um, it wasn't the real world enough. It was too narrow and too much about, okay, what's the next journal and who's actually reading those journals? It's other academics. Like, let's take the stuff from the journals and put it into tangible, practical. How can we help human beings? And work is a huge part of identity. It's huge. That's why I specialized in work psychology because it's a lot of people's identity. And I know we say, well, it's just a job, and but it's not. It's more than that to people. You say, what's your name? I'm Ira. What do you do, Ira? It's the
Hmm.
second question you get asked.
That's true. That's
Hmm.
exactly. What do you do? And I say, I don't know. I'm a toxic boss, so I have no idea what I do.
You have an
Oh,
amazing podcast and bagels, and I want to be interviewing you at some point because I think
we
the
can do it.
bagel theme is really interesting. I think you have some stories, and I'm curious.
Yes, a few little stories here and there. And but my wife was the one who came up with the name, but she knew what I was looking for, which is to talk with interesting people like you on a wide variety of fields. And that's why it's an everything bagel versus just a sesame bagel or a
I
plain.
love it.
That's the reason
Love
for
it.
that. So getting back to you though, when I asked you earlier about what happens when you shared the book with colleagues and with friends, and if you got feedback or not, anything that needed to be changed. I'm not quite sure you answered it, but I can tie it in with the same question, which is,
Mm.
did you get feedback from friends or colleagues that read and said, you know what? You just opened my eyes to something here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of feedback, so for sure I had feedback along the way. I had multiple editors along the way giving feedback. And then I had some clients I worked with where I'd give them the PDF of the book and say,
Right.
I want you to start using this and let me know how it is. And it did really, really help them. And I know that for a fact because I saw all the tears and all the challenges, and then I saw them work through this and come out the other side of it. And I said, okay, good, this is working. And then I got an endorsement by Marshall Goldsmith, who is a doctor in the field of business and leadership. And he's one of the gurus. And I can't believe he did that because it's one of those, if you don't ask, the answer's no. And I asked and
Exactly
I got
right.
a yes.
No,
And
you're absolutely
Marshall,
right. You got to ask the question.
he loved the book,
Yeah.
and so his endorsement's going to go on the front top cover because he's just so well known. But I had other endorsements by really best New York Times bestsellers and people I really respect in the world, and they gave me great endorsements. And I thought, okay, this is good. But the true test will be how many people it helps in the world.
Hmm. And do you find that when you looked at the research, I don't know if it's possible to quantify this or not, but did you have a percentage of, if you look at all the bosses in North America, I'll use North America again, what percentage of those bosses are toxic? Was there any way of quantifying that at all?
I mean, it would be very difficult to quantify that. And partially it's because, well, what is the definition of toxic? And as I said earlier, it gets mixed up with difficult, but I've been charting it lately based on all the experience research and anecdotal, and I have this bell curve I've been drawing, and I think I'll do an article about it because it's hard to nail in the science, but I would say that less than 5% of bosses are great leaders.
Just less than
Great
5%.
leaders.
Wow.
Hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
what I would call a great leader. Then we have maybe 10 to 15% or maybe 20% are good leaders. They're good and they can get better. Then we have the average. Then we have the difficult. I would say difficult are easily 20% or 25%. There's a lot of them. And then toxic, 5 to 10%.
Okay.
And I've been saying five, and then people in who I respect are saying, I think it's more like 10, Laura. But but even if it's 5%, if you do it numerically, that's like millions.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like that's serious and
Yeah.
significant if it's
Well,
5%. But
that's why
let's
I think
just
the book will have a good impact on people who have
So
to
I
deal
don't
with
know.
it.
I wish I could collect that data. I really do, but that would be really hard to collect. We are collecting surveys across North America. I have a research partner in the US, and we got a grant to really look at this, more broadly going forward even. And we're going to collect more gender data because I keep getting asked about that. What percent are women versus men
Yeah.
versus,
Yeah.
yeah,
Everybody likes those things. Before I
they
let you go,
do.
one last question, and that is, what would you like people to take away from the book primarily, from reading the book? What would you like? I know we've talked about it in different ways throughout our conversation, but is there one thing that you'd like for people to take away from the book?
that there is hope. If you are struggling and under a toxic boss, I have a whole chapter on life beyond a toxic boss, thriving in your career, your career. You're the CEO of your own career. And I have stories of hope and survivors who are doing so much better now and really saying, I wish I'd quit sooner. And I want to pass that on to you that here's what happened after I left. It was like the windows open and the negative energy left. And it just really is inspiring. And I want to leave people with that hope and inspiration, not all negative and doom and gloom.
Well, that's a great way to leave it. My guest has been Dr. Laura Hambley Lovett, PhD. She's author of I Wish I Had Quit Sooner: Practical Strategies for Navigating and Escaping a Toxic Boss. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, bookshop.org, and all the usual places. And for everything about Dr. Laura, go to drlaura.live and follow her on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, X, and YouTube. And Dr. Laura, thanks for being on the show.
It is my pleasure. Thank you, Ira, for being awesome.
Thank you, and see you next time on Ira's Everything Bagel.